A coded message arrives at spy headquarters in London. An agent, trapped behind enemy lines on a perilous mountain escape, has a problem with someone named Cuthbert. The reply from the unsuspecting officer in London is chillingly bureaucratic. If Cuthbert is giving you trouble, have him eliminated. But Cuthbert wasn't a person. It was the nickname she gave to her 7-pound wooden leg. The agent was Virginia Hall, an American spy with a prosthetic limb, hunted by the Gestapo across all of France. And now, her own commanders, blind to her reality, were advising her to get rid of her leg. How did a woman, rejected by her own country for her disability, become the Gestapo's most wanted target? And how did she turn her greatest vulnerability into her most powerful weapon? To understand, we have to go back to the beginning. August 1944, the high plateau of the WWII region in south-central France. A peasant woman, bent with age, drives a small herd of goats along a dusty road. Her face is a road map of wrinkles, her hair a shock of gray pulled back under a simple kerchief. She moves slowly, deliberately, with a pronounced limp that speaks of a lifetime of hard farm labor. German patrols pass her in their vehicles, kicking up clouds of dust. They glance at the old woman and her goats, seeing nothing more than a rustic, unremarkable piece of the local scenery. They see a crone, a non-entity, someone utterly invisible. That is the deadliest mistake Klaus Barbie, the infamous butcher of Lyon, will ever make. Because the woman is not old. She is 38 years old, an American, and the person the Gestapo has codenamed Artemis. They have described her in their most wanted bulletins as the most dangerous of all Allied spies, promising that they must find and destroy her. Hidden beneath the woman's farm clothes is a prosthetic leg she has nicknamed Cuthbert, and the woman with the limp knows exactly how to command armies. Her name is Virginia Hall, and she is not just a spy. She is a master of guerrilla warfare, a brilliant organizer, and the architect of one of the most successful resistance networks in occupied France. This is the story of a woman who was told her career was over before it began, simply because she had one leg. A debutante from Baltimore who transformed herself into a ghost. An operative so effective the enemy considered her a phantom menace. A field agent who organized parachute drops, established clandestine radio networks, and armed thousands of French partisans right under the noses of the German army. A leader who commanded sabotage operations that destroyed 4 bridges, derailed freight trains, severed key communication lines, and killed more than 150 enemy soldiers while capturing 500 more. And yet, for most of her life, Virginia Hall's story remained classified, a secret hidden in government files, overshadowed by the stories of her male colleagues, overshadowed by a society that preferred its female heroes to be nurses or code breakers, not frontline commanders, overshadowed by the very institutions she served, which repeatedly tried to sideline her, first for her gender and then for her disability. Near the end of her long and quiet life, Virginia would rarely speak of the war, deflecting praise with a quiet modesty that belied the fire within her. But her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Her story matters. It matters because it is a testament to sheer, indomitable will. It matters because it redefines our understanding of what a hero looks like. And it matters because understanding what Virginia Hall accomplished, and the obstacles she overcame to do it, is the only way to truly appreciate the staggering power of a single individual who refuses to be told no. Let's go back to the beginning. February 6th, 1906. Virginia Hall was born in Baltimore, Maryland, into a world of wealth and privilege. She was not born into a struggle for survival, but into a life of comfort and expectation. Her father, Edwin Lee Hall, was a successful banker and cinema owner. Her mother, Barbara, was a society figure. Virginia grew up on a sprawling estate called Boxhorn Farms, attended the prestigious Roland Park Country School, and was expected to follow the traditional path of a well-to-do young woman of her era. finish her education, marry well, and settle into a life of domestic comfort. But Virginia was different. She was restless, intelligent, and fiercely independent. She had a gift for languages and a thirst for adventure that could not be contained by Baltimore society. She attended Radcliffe College, which was the female coordinate institution for Harvard, and then Barnard College at Columbia University, studying French, Italian, and German. But the classroom wasn't enough. She wanted to see the world. So she used her family's money and connections to continue her studies in Europe, attending schools in France, Germany, and Austria. She was tall, slim, with auburn hair and piercing eyes, a striking figure who dreamed of a life of consequence. Her ambition was to join the United States Foreign Service, to become a diplomat, a role almost entirely dominated by men at the time. In 1931, she secured a clerical position at the American Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. It was a foot in the door, a first step toward her ultimate goal. From there, she moved to a consular post in Izmir, Turkey. She was in her late 20s, living a life of excitement and purpose, traveling, meeting influential people, and learning the intricate dance of international politics. Her future seemed bright, her dream within reach. And then, in December of 1933, everything changed. During a hunting party in the Turkish countryside, she was climbing over a wire fence when her shotgun slipped. She stumbled, and the gun discharged, firing a blast of birdshot directly into her left foot and ankle. The injury was catastrophic. Doctors fought to save her leg, but gangrene set in. To save her life, they had to amputate her left leg below the knee. She was 27 years old. Her life, as she had known it, was over. She was fitted with a cumbersome and often painful wooden prosthesis, a heavy device she would come to call Cuthbert. The physical pain was immense, but the psychological blow was even worse. The United States State Department had an archaic regulation that prohibited anyone with a missing limb from joining the Foreign Service. It was a rule rooted in prejudice, a belief that a diplomat needed to be able-bodied, a whole person. When Virginia applied again for a diplomatic post after her recovery, she was formally and finally rejected. Her dream was shattered, not because of her intellect, her skills, or her character, but because of a piece of wood and metal strapped to her thigh. They saw the disability, not the ability. They saw a cripple, not a candidate. It was a bitter, soul-crushing injustice. Virginia resigned from the State Department in 1939, feeling adrift and betrayed by the country she so desperately wanted to serve. That same year, as Hitler's armies began their march across Europe, Virginia was in Paris, a civilian with no official role. But she refused to be a bystander. When war was declared, she immediately volunteered for the French ambulance service. She drove ambulances to and from the front lines, ferrying wounded soldiers through the chaos and carnage of the Battle of France. She witnessed the collapse of the French army, the blitzkrieg tactics of the Germans, and the desperation of a nation on its knees. When France fell in June 1940, she, like so many others, became a refugee. She made her way to Spain, and from there to London. She was a woman without a country in a continent consumed by war. She had no job, no mission, but she had a burning hatred for the Nazis and a fierce determination to fight them. It was in London, in the spring of 1941, that she met a woman who would change her life. Vera Atkins, a senior intelligence officer in a brand new, highly secretive British organization known as the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. The SOE's mission, as mandated by Winston Churchill himself, was to set Europe ablaze. They were to recruit, train, and deploy secret agents into occupied territories to work with local resistance groups, committing acts of sabotage, gathering intelligence, and generally creating havoc for the German war machine. Atkins was looking for a specific type of recruit, people who were tough, resourceful, and fluent in French. Virginia Hall fit the description perfectly, and crucially, the SOE didn't care about her leg. They cared about her courage, her language skills, and her iron will. At last, someone saw her for who she was. Virginia accepted their offer without a moment's hesitation. She underwent the grueling SOE training regimen, learning cryptography, radio operation, tradecraft, and the brutal art of silent killing. She learned to handle explosives and firearms. Her instructors noted her remarkable determination and her high intelligence. They also noted her prosthetic leg. Some were skeptical. How could a woman with a limp possibly survive as an undercover agent in Nazi-occupied territory? One training report dryly noted she was gutsy and determined, but all too often a victim of her disability. They underestimated her. They all underestimated her. It was a mistake they made once, but one her enemies would make again and again, to their great cost. In August of 1941, Virginia Hall was parachuted into Vichy, France, the so-called unoccupied zone that was in reality a puppet state controlled by the Nazis. She was the first female Allied agent to be sent into France for an extended mission. Her cover story was that of a reporter for the New York Post, a role that gave her a plausible reason to travel, ask questions, and meet people. Her mission was to act as a talent scout and organizer, to make contact with the fledgling French resistance, assess their capabilities, and build a functioning network in the Lyon area. She was given the code name Marie. She arrived with a list of potential contacts and a suitcase full of money. She was almost entirely on her own. For the next 15 months, Virginia, operating out of Lyon, proved to be one of the most effective agents the SOE had ever deployed. She was a natural organizer, a master of disguise, and utterly fearless. She built a vast and complex resistance network, codenamed Heckle, from the ground up. She recruited doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, and even prostitutes into her service. She arranged safe houses for agents on the run. She organized parachute drops of weapons, radios, and money. She helped downed Allied airmen escape over the mountains into neutral Spain. She became the central hub for all SOE activity in the region. She learned to turn her disability into an asset. A woman with a noticeable limp was memorable, yes, but she also inspired pity and was often dismissed as harmless. She could play the part of a frail, slightly pathetic figure, and German patrols would pass her by without a second glance, never imagining that the unassuming woman with the cane was the linchpin of the Allied spy network in their city. Her work was incredibly dangerous. The Gestapo, led by the ruthless Klaus Barbie, was brutally efficient at hunting down resistance members. Torture and execution were standard practice. Virginia lived in the constant shadow of discovery. She changed her appearance frequently, dyeing her hair, altering her style of dress, even changing the way she walked to make her limp more or less pronounced. But her network was too successful, too active, to go unnoticed forever. The Germans knew a major Allied operation was being run out of Lyon. They just didn't know who was running it. They started hearing whispers from informants about a mysterious Canadian, a woman with a limp who seemed to be at the center of everything. They gave this phantom agent a code name of their own, Artemis, and they began to hunt for the limping lady with a terrifying ferocity. In November of 1942, the situation became critical. The Allies invaded North Africa, and in response, Germany officially occupied all of France, including the Vichy zone. The Gestapo poured into Lyon, and the net began to tighten. Virginia's network was compromised by a double agent, a priest named Robert Alesh, who betrayed them to the Germans. Dozens of her contacts were arrested. Virginia knew she had to get out, and get out fast. Her only escape route was over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, a treacherous journey on foot through deep snow and freezing temperatures. It was a brutal ordeal for any able-bodied person. For a woman with a 7.5-pound wooden leg, it was almost impossible. She hired a guide, but the journey was agonizing. Cuthbert, her prosthesis, chafed her stump raw, causing excruciating pain with every step. At one point, she sent a coded message back to the SOE headquarters in London. Fearing that her leg was holding her and her companions back and might endanger the entire group, she signaled that she hoped Cuthbert would not give her too much trouble on the journey. The signals officer in London, not knowing her nickname for her leg, famously replied with a message that showed a stunning lack of awareness. "If Cuthbert giving you trouble, have him eliminated." Virginia pushed on, driven by sheer grit. After 3 grueling days in the mountains, she made it across the border into Spain, only to be promptly arrested by the Spanish authorities for illegal entry. She spent 6 weeks in a Spanish prison before the American embassy finally secured her release. She had escaped, but just barely. The SOE, believing her cover was permanently blown and that it was too dangerous for her to return to France, brought her back to London. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. But Virginia Hall was not most people. She was furious at being pulled from the field. She spent months in London, working as a trainer for new agents, but she was desperate to get back into the fight. The SOE, however, refused to send her back, deeming the risk too high. The Gestapo now had a full description of her and were actively hunting her. But there was another, newer American intelligence agency on the scene, the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the precursor to the CIA. The OSS was building its own networks in France, and they needed experienced agents. Virginia saw her chance. She joined the OSS, and in March of 1944, against the advice of many, she returned to occupied France. This time, the mission was even more dangerous. She couldn't use her old identity. She couldn't go back to Lyon. She had to become someone entirely new. So, Virginia Hall, the sophisticated, multilingual American journalist, transformed herself. She dyed her hair gray, had her teeth ground down to resemble those of a peasant, and adopted a shuffling, stooped posture. She became Marcel Montaigne, an elderly milkmaid. She settled in the Haute-Loire department, a rugged, rural area where she could blend in with the local population. Her new code name was Diane. Her mission was to link up with the local maquis, the French guerrilla fighters hiding in the hills, and prepare them for the upcoming Allied invasion of Europe. She was to arm them, train them, and lead them in a campaign of sabotage to disrupt the German army when D-Day finally came. What Virginia accomplished in the 5 months between her arrival and the liberation of Paris is nothing short of legendary. Working as an old farm woman, she roamed the countryside, ostensibly selling cheese and milk, but in reality she was mapping German positions, recruiting fighters, and organizing a secret army. She established a new network, codenamed Saint, and arranged for massive airdrops of weapons and supplies from England. At night, she would operate her clandestine radio, transmitting vital intelligence back to London. She personally trained 3 battalions of resistance fighters, a force numbering more than 1,500 men, in the tactics of guerrilla warfare. She taught them how to use explosives, how to stage ambushes, how to disappear back into the countryside. At first, some of the hardened French fighters were skeptical. What could this woman, this American with a limp, teach them about fighting? She quickly earned their respect with her absolute fearlessness, her tactical brilliance, and her unwavering resolve. When the D-Day landings occurred in Normandy on June 6, 1944, Virginia's army was ready. On her command, they launched a relentless campaign of sabotage. They blew up 4 critical bridges, cutting off a German division. They derailed multiple freight trains carrying supplies and troops. They tore down telephone and telegraph lines, severing communications between German headquarters and their forces in the south. Her fighters engaged in constant hit-and-run attacks, harassing German columns, ambushing patrols, and making the entire region ungovernable for the occupying army. The Germans responded with brutal reprisals, but they could never catch the ghost who was orchestrating the chaos. They were still hunting for a one-legged Canadian woman in Lyon, never suspecting that their real nemesis was the old milkmaid they passed on the road every day. By the time the Allies broke out from Normandy and began their sweep across France, Virginia's forces had effectively liberated vast swaths of central France on their own. She had done more than just harass the enemy. She had forged a disciplined and effective fighting force that tied down thousands of German troops who were desperately needed elsewhere. Her intelligence reports on German troop movements were invaluable to the advancing Allied armies. When the war finally ended, the full scope of her achievements became clear. She had not only survived, she had triumphed. In recognition of her extraordinary service, she was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration in the United States. President Harry S. Truman wanted to present the award to her personally in a public ceremony at the White House. Virginia refused. She told her superiors that she was still operational and most anxious to get on with the work. She insisted on a private, quiet ceremony, wanting no publicity. The award was presented to her by General William Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, in his office. She became the only civilian woman to receive the Distinguished Service Cross in the Second World War. Her citation praised her for developing and coordinating the resistance networks, for the invaluable intelligence she provided, and for her role in the campaign of sabotage and guerrilla warfare which played a major part in the German disintegration in southern France. After the war, Virginia joined the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, one of the first women hired. It seemed like the perfect fit. But once again, she found herself facing the same old prejudices. In the male-dominated bureaucratic culture of the CIA, she was an anomaly. Her spectacular field experience was discounted. She was a woman, and a woman with a disability. They didn't know what to do with her. She was passed over for promotions, relegated to desk jobs, her talents largely wasted. For 15 years, she worked as an intelligence analyst, a quiet and unassuming figure in the halls of Langley. The fiery field agent who had commanded armies and outwitted the Gestapo was now writing reports that were often ignored by her male superiors. She retired in 1966 at the mandatory age of 60. She and her husband, Paul Goyot, a former OSS agent she had met and worked with in France, retired to a farm in Barnesville, Maryland. She lived a quiet, secluded life, rarely speaking of her wartime exploits. To her neighbors, she was just a pleasant, retired government worker who liked to garden and tend to her beloved poodles. They had no idea they were living next to one of the greatest spies of the 20th century. Virginia Hall died on July 8, 1982, at the age of 76. She was buried in a simple grave in a local cemetery. Her story, for the most part, died with her, locked away in classified files and the memories of a few old intelligence officers. But in recent years, as archives have been declassified and historians have begun to dig deeper, her incredible story has finally come to light. Books have been written. Documentaries have been made. In 2016, the CIA finally gave her a measure of the public recognition she never sought in life, naming a training facility the Virginia Hall Expeditionary Center. Her legacy is a powerful refutation of every limitation that was ever placed upon her. The State Department told her she couldn't be a diplomat because of her leg. She responded by becoming a master of espionage, who changed the course of the war in France. The SOE told her she was too compromised to go back into the field. She responded by creating a secret army and liberating a region of the country. The CIA relegated her to a desk. History has now elevated her to the pantheon of spies. Virginia's story is a profound lesson in the nature of strength. She took what society saw as her greatest weakness, her gender and her disability, and turned them into her greatest assets. They were the core of her camouflage, the reason her enemies consistently underestimated her, the cloak of invisibility that allowed her to operate in plain sight. She proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. She proved that leadership has nothing to do with physical wholeness and everything to do with the wholeness of one's spirit. Her life was a quiet, stubborn, and ultimately triumphant act of defiance against a world that tried to define her by her limitations. July 8, 1982. The woman they told couldn't be a diplomat because of a piece of wood strapped to her leg was laid to rest. The reporter who built spy rings. The milkmaid who commanded armies. The ghost the Gestapo could never catch. The limping lady who helped set Europe ablaze. The soldier who insisted her greatest honor be given in private. The survivor who spent her whole life proving that the only disabilities that truly matter are the ones we accept for ourselves. The woman who was underestimated at every single turn, and who used that ignorance as her sharpest weapon. They saw a woman. They saw a cripple. They never saw the warrior standing right in front of them. Virginia Hall's story forces us to look again, to see past the surface, to question our own prejudices about who can be a hero and what courage looks like. Her name deserves to be known. Her story deserves to be told. Not as a footnote, not as a curiosity, but as a central chapter in the history of the fight against tyranny. As the story of someone who was told she was broken and responded by helping to save the world. As someone who proved that one person, driven by an unbreakable will, can indeed become an army.